So hello and welcome to the NPTEL course titled Trauma and Literature. We're looking at Toni Morrison's novel Beloved, and we're reading a particular essay which covers the novel in some details, as well as discuss some of the themes that we are constantly connecting to in this particular course. Now, we're beginning to wind up our reading of the novel and the essay, and the section that we'll discuss today is titled Repressing Red. Right, so how red becomes a signifier of repression. And of course, repression is connected to agencylessness, voicelessness, etc., other forms of slavery. And this should be on your screen. So the second step in which Beloved's characters process the wounds of slavery is the repression of his horrors. The novel endows both Paul D. and Sethe with powerful red images of the traumas of slavery. In these instances, which serve as a transitional stage between the state of shock and the beginning of successfully dealing with trauma, the novel turns the concrete and physical appearance of red into figurative elements, tropes, as it were, portraying the internalization and the repression of slavery's cruelties. Now, these are two key words over here: internalization and repression. So you find how slavery becomes an internalized process, just so you don't even question the atrocity or the violence or the illegality or the inhumanity of the whole process. It just becomes internalized and hence legitimized in a very perverse way. And of course, what that does, consequently, is it generates the culture of repression, through which agency, voice, will are all repressed. And also storytelling, and the very fact that you can't even tell your stories. All you can do is suffer in silence. So silence, evasiveness, we talked about how these become almost narrative categories in this novel. And this is obviously the part of internalization. The most conspicuous example of the use of the color red in Beloved in relation to repression is Sethe's contact with the pink tombstone against which she leans in an engraver's workshop, and which is explicitly denoted as a lighter shade of red in a description of the fading color progression started with a baby's blood, right? So there are different shades of red which we find throughout the novel. So this is baby's blood, and from there it moves to the pink tombstone. So the different shades of red correspond to different psychological conditions and psychological locations. The image certainly appears similar to the ones described above as an occurrence of physical contact with the color red. Sethe is having sex with the engraver while leaning against a tombstone, feeling its welcoming cool. There's even an instance of voicelessness or a lack of words in that Sethe has to prostitute herself to the engraver will pull out her daughter's name on the stone. In fact, it pains Sethe afterwards she did not get the word dearly as well, since she might only have to ask for it to return for another 10 minutes of sexual favors. The lack of words and voice is manifold. Sethe cannot afford to have words put on the stone, and when she prostitutes herself, she does not get all the words she wants because she does not speak up and does not ask for them. So we find this barbaric scene where the mother has to prostitute herself to get her daughter's name engraved in a stone. Is also an example of obviously abuse at a bodily level, sexual, but also abuse at a word level. She cannot speak out what she wants. She cannot say the word. She cannot say the adjective that she wants to be engraved in a stone. And for that, she might have to go back again and prostitute herself to the engraver. So you find there's a very direct and very complex and very perverse and unsettling link between violence and death, right? And the tombstone obviously becomes the material of death in a certain sense, the matter of death, the symbol of death. The engraving of the name of the subject who has died, right? And so that quality of the tombstone becomes interesting over here and symbolic. At the same time, that also becomes a site of sexual violence. That also becomes a site for producing deadness, because the sexual act done or perpetrated to Sethe is also, in a way, killing her humanity, killing her as a human, killing her as a human subject, in a process, just generating her as some kind of an object, a commodified object, a sexual object, right? So the site of the tombstone becomes quite symbolic in terms of the landscape of violence and abuse and trauma that is subjects are subjected to throughout the novel. So the difference from the occurrences of red described in the previous section is that this concrete physical object is rather explicitly turned into a metaphor for Sethe's repression of her memories of the infanticide, right? So the fact that the child was killed right? So this becomes a metaphor for repressing that memory, the tombstone. The immense importance for this repression for Sethe is expressed in her own description of her work in the restaurant, working door, making nothing better than to start the day's serious work of beating back the past. So the physical act of beating the door, in a way, gives her the tactile experience of the past, right? So she's beating back the past. So there's only form of motor control, only form of touch, only form of retaliation through touch or tactile retaliation that's possible for her to beat back the door. So she's enjoying that bit. So you can see how the degree to which these people are dehumanized, the degree to which these people are subjected to trauma. So Marilyn Sanders Mobley has just described Sethe as being in a kind of psychic bondage to the task of keeping the past at bay, right? So psychologically she's tied, she's imprisoned, she's a slave, which will keep the task of keeping the past at bay. So the past should not come back, so she's keeping the past at bay. The process of repression is visible in her own admission of a regression of color awareness, not coincidentally exemplified with the color red, starting with the red blood, the blood of the daughter she killed, right? And this is a quotation from the novel. Because the last color she remembered was the pink chips in the headstone of the baby girl. After that, she became as color conscious as a hen. Every dawn she walked at fruit pies, potato dishes, and vegetables, while the cook did the soup, meat, and all the rest. And she could not remembering a molly apple or a yellow squash. Every dawn she saw the dawn, but never acknowledged or remarked its color. There was something wrong with that. It was as though one day she saw the red baby blood, another day the pink gravestone chips, and that was the last of it, right? So it almost becomes some kind of a color closure, right? So she cannot see, she cannot experience any other color apart from red and pink. So the colors of the dead baby, the color of the tombstone. So she's stuck between two orders of deadness. One, the physical, the biological body of deadness, and the other, the symbol of deadness, the tombstone. And both are marked by different shades of red. And she seems to be stuck between different shades of red, and she cannot move on to another color. Now, what this does at a very symbolic level, a very chromatic level, is, it just imprisons her in a particular color. It makes her a bond, some kind of a slave to a certain color, right? And the fact that she cannot move on to a different color is also connected to a lack of agency, a lack of, being able to say what she is or what she wants, right? So she's just stuck in redness, and different shades of redness. So redness obviously becomes a metaphor for imprisonment at a very visceral, experiential level. So accordingly, the pink tombstone can be seen as a transitional piece, starting out as a literally cold and hard reality of slavery, along with its consequences, and ending up as a metaphorical device, which a novel employs to illustrate the process of repression. So the tombstone becomes a device over here. The tombstone becomes a transitional piece, from the hard. I mean, it's cold and hard. The coldness of death is there, and the tombstone, and then it's a device which novel employs to illustrate the process of repression, right? So because if you think of the site of the tombstone, the story, the site in which Sethe was sexually attacked and gave herself up for the sexual invasion, for the sexual slaughter. And, it was just an act of repression, an act of being silent and silently suffering the sexual attack, the bodily violence. So we can see how the tombstone becomes the reality of slavery as well as a symbol of repression. A similar observation can be made in relation to Paul D. His most intense instance of shame, as discussed above, is that of seeing the free and proud rooster messed up with his red comb and sweet horn. Paul D. himself is forced to endure an iron bit in his mouth, which, as Gianna Fuston White points out, in general, reduces a slave to animality so effectively and strips him or her of language of humanity, right? So the iron in her mouth is just completely animalizes Paul D. And this literal translation or transition into an animal state is exactly part of the systemic process of torture and abuse and violence that slavery perpetrates in a very intergenerational way. Kristen Bourdieu, in a study of the unmaking of self, argues convincingly that this causes Paul D. to discover his own contrasting enslavement and arrive at a definition of himself imposed by his internalization of the rooster's gaze. Now, I'll stop at this point today. But again, what we're seeing here is he's internalizing the rooster's gaze. So the gaze of being enslaved, something was looking at him as a slave. He internalizes that gaze, and that further animalizes him, that further dehumanizes him. And again, we're looking at a relationship between repression and internalization. So the fact that he's aware of being gazed at as a slave, he's aware of being reified, he's aware of being commodified as a slave, and that awareness, that knowledge of commodification, the fact that the gaze is there at him as an object, transforming him into an object, he internalizes that. Right? In the process, he further objectifies himself, he further dehumanizes himself. So we can see how, in a very complex and perhaps paradoxical way, Paul D shapes his own internalization, shapes his own commodification, shapes his own slavery, and he accentuates and intensifies his own slavery, his own imprisonment, and he adds on to it by internalizing that gaze on himself or at himself. So we'll stop at this point today, and we'll finish this text and the study of the text in a subsequent session. Thank you for your attention.